We are back for night 3 of the 2020 Democratic National Convention. Tonight's lineup will feature a trio of firsts: the nation's first black president, the first female major party nominee, and the country's first person of color to be picked as a major party running mate. This is the scene inside the Chase Center in Wilmington, Delaware, where Vice Presidential hopeful Kamala Harris will give her speech tonight, and where the newly minted presidential nominee Joe Biden will speak tomorrow. Like everything else with this convention, things look vastly different than past years. Instead of a packed arena, they are using a room used for auto shows and high school proms. But the virtual convention opened up a compelling new visual opportunity for Democrats. Instead of delegates casting votes from their seats, they did so from their home states and territories, often showcasing the geographic beauty and variation of our country. Joe Biden and his wife Jill, the night's keynote speaker, celebrated with their grandchildren at a school where she used to teach. It was a night where Democrats took time to look to the potential future of the party with speeches from what they called the rising stars. I'll be speaking to one of those rising stars later in the show. We also heard from the party's past, with 2 former presidents urging the country to reject President Trump in November.
When I ran for president in 1976, Joe Biden was my first and most effective supporter in the Senate. For decades, he has been my loyal and dedicated friend. Joe has the experience, character, and decency to bring us together and restore America's greatness.
At a time like this, the Oval Office should be a command center. Instead, it's a storm center. There's only chaos. Just one thing never changes: his determination to deny responsibility and shift the blame. The buck never stops there. It's Trump's us versus them America against Joe Biden's America, where we all live and work together. It's a clear choice. The future of our country is riding on it.
With most polls at the moment showing Joe Biden leading both nationally and in important swing states, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany was asked about the president's comments in Wisconsin Monday, saying the only way he'll lose the election is if it's rigged.
The president has always said he'll see what happens and make a determination in the aftermath. It's the same thing he said last November. He wants a free election, a fair election, and he wants confidence in the results of the election.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, Major Garrett, and Joel Payne join me now. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter. She's with us from outside the Chase Center in Wilmington. Major is CBS News chief Washington correspondent, and Joel is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Hello, everyone. Let's start with Kayleigh McEnany's comments. Major, what would actually happen if a sitting president refused to accept an election defeat?
I don't want to contemplate that, Elaine. I don't think many Americans want to contemplate that. I'm quite sure Senate Republicans and House Republicans don't want to contemplate it, and I'm fairly certain most people in the Trump White House don't want to contemplate that. It would be, in every stretch of the imagination, an unprecedented situation, a scenario too grotesque, too ghastly, too illegal constitutionally to even contemplate. But the president has left it hanging, dangling out there in sort of a perilous rhetorical joust at the way the election is currently being organized. Remember, not at the federal level, at the state and local level. States supervise their own elections, and secretaries of state around this country are working overtime to make sure this election, stalked as it is by the pandemic, is conducted safely, accurately, verifiably, and legally. That's their mandate. That's their responsibility. And I've talked to secretaries of state of both parties across the country, and they know that rhetoric such as the president expressed earlier this week, that the only way he can lose is if the election is rigged, undermines confidence in the very thing they're trying to achieve, which is a set of confidence among their voters, proper information that guides them accurately to the best way, the safest way, and the most verifiable way to vote. That work is going on the ground, and it's happening every hour of every day. And it works independently of this rhetoric that comes from the president. And the country is going to have to soak this in, as it has had to soak in so many things about the president that are unusual or that break norms. This is not just breaking norms or being unusual. It is the highest, most powerful constitutional officer of our government saying, if I don't win, it must be illegitimate. I think the country is listening to that, absorbing that, and I guarantee you secretaries of state of both parties are, as well are clerks and those at the county level who are trying to carry out polling places, organize mail-in balloting, recruit poll workers, and do the fundamental, basic civic work required of all Americans to conduct a free, fair, and verifiable election. That work continues. That the president extravagantly and rhetorically pours gasoline on it and then sets it ablaze for his own amusement and possibly for the amusement of some in his political base is a predilection he will have to explain. And I believe history will hold him to account for it.
Joel, given just the gravity of what Major outlined there, you have the Biden campaign seeming to position itself for these possible election issues potentially with an army of lawyers. Is it clear, Joel, what those lawyers would do if President Trump refused to accept the election results?
Well, look, I think Major's framing is appropriate. And you're right, Elaine. The Biden campaign and Democrats know that they have to be ready for any scenario. Just in my experience working with some of the kind of best and brightest of lawyers of the Democratic Party, they are ready to make ballot challenges. They are ready to make sure that lines stay open as long as they need to stay open, to make sure that folks can lawfully cast a vote, to make sure that votes aren't thrown out, and obviously the ongoing fight around mail-in voting. So I think the Biden campaign understands that, as we all have kind of braced ourselves for, this isn't going to be election day or election evening. It's probably going to be election week or election season. And I think that they are ready. They are staffed up and they're ready to go. And Democrats around the country understand you have a very unique historical situation where you have a president who is teasing that he will not accept the outcome of the election, and that will be determined based on whether or not it is favorable or unfavorable to him. It's really something we're not used to in this country, but Democrats and the Biden campaign, I believe, are ready for it.
I want to turn to the issue of health care. Caitlin, today the Supreme Court announced a start date for oral arguments in a case challenging whether Obamacare is constitutional. The arguments are set for 1 week after the election. We heard a lot of talk about health care during the Democratic convention last night, but not a lot of specific policy details. What exactly is Joe Biden's plan for the U.S. health care system if he's elected?
Well, throughout the Democratic primary, Joe Biden set himself apart from a lot of his rivals by not embracing a Medicare for all type of system and instead arguing to build upon Obamacare. And what he knows from years and years and years in politics is that anytime you try to introduce big changes to health care, people react negatively. We saw that in 2010. We saw that again in 2018. Health care is an animating issue for voters because it's a personal issue for voters and it's an economic issue for voters, and especially a more pronounced issue because we are in the middle of a pandemic. People are concerned about their health care, their access to it, their health care security, especially with so many becoming unemployed in this pandemic and health care being so attached to employment in this country. This figures to be another huge issue in this election. And so while we didn't hear policy specifics from Biden, and we expect more policy specifics to come, it is interesting that we kind of spent a whole Democratic primary arguing about, or the candidates arguing about Medicare for all versus building upon Obamacare. I think the message that Democrats want to send in November and building up to it is pointing to the court case that you just mentioned, positioning themselves as the party that wants to build upon the healthcare system as it is, and arguing that Trump and the administration are working to take away some of those benefits. So that is the frame that Democrats are hoping to make, and especially a huge issue given that the pandemic has forced this issue to be a personal, economic, and one that exposes social and racial injustice in this country.
Major, if President Trump is reelected, is it clear what his vision would be for the U.S. healthcare system in America?
No. The Republicans under President Trump's leadership took out one significant pillar of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, the individual mandate. They have sued to get rid of the rest of the law because they argue without the individual mandate, it has no constitutional underpinning. That is the contrast that Caitlin just described. Democrats want to say, what side of this issue are you on? Do you want to preserve the remaining structure of Obamacare and pre-existing conditions protections that come with it, as well as other benefits, or do you not? Very simple question. That's how Democrats want to frame it. I think the simple and practical policy and political truth for both parties, Elaine, is that no one is going to have a kind of list of policy specifics on whatever becomes of the Affordable Care Act, whether it's a Democratic administration or Republican administration, for a very simple reason. The country does not know what economic shape it's going to be in come the summer of next year. If, in fact, the pandemic gets under control and we have a manageable fall and a manageable winter, we're still going to be dealing with a lot of economic wreckage. If we do not, if flu is intense and the pandemic surges back and it's a more difficult fall and winter than we currently contemplate, our already weak economy will be in even greater weakness, more damage. And all those fundamentals will play into insecurity about access to health care and availability of health care, plus the underlying health care economics assigned to it. So there may be some greater policy specificity, but I don't think anyone who is serious about this issue and about implementing the ideas to come next are prepared to say this is what it's going to be and nothing else, because we don't know where our country is going to be in terms of its aggregate health, or meaning how healthy we are with the pandemic, or our aggregate economic health come the spring and summer of next year, when any serious legislating on this matter, especially if a Democrat is elected, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, to take up that issue. We don't know what the foundation will be beneath that policy debate or the political ramifications either. I think that's a big X factor for next year.
So, Joel, I'm curious what your take is on what Major just said. If you have all this uncertainty, you have healthcare very much top of mind for so many people. It's something that clearly, as we saw during the convention last night, Democrats want to put front and center, but it is difficult from an actual specifics kind of level, granular detail level to know, because there are so many variables. Is that a more difficult position to be in, because you are campaigning on this idea of being the party to preserve healthcare access, and yet there is so much that is unknown right now that crafting anything granular and specific is something that may be very difficult to do.
Well, look, obviously I'm a partisan on this, so I don't want to be Pollyannish here, but I think Democrats actually have a pretty easy case to make on health care. Their values have been clear on it for over a decade, even beyond that. When you look at Obamacare and you look at the steps that Democrats have taken to strengthen Obamacare in the following decade, I think there's a consistency there of that position. There is also a consistency for the Republican position, which is it's not a priority. Let's take away the individual mandate. They don't feel the urgency with health care in the country the way that Democrats do. That's why you saw Democrats parade out a number of people who were telling their personal stories about their kind of healthcare close misses, things that would have been worse if they didn't have the security of Obamacare. You're going to continue to see that. And I think you're going to continue to hear Democrats talk about how the contrast of Donald Trump in the middle of a pandemic suing to remove millions and millions of Americans from having health care security versus Joe Biden, who wants to strengthen the Affordable Care Act. That's a powerful contrast. It's an issue that Democrats win on in the polls. They win on Election Day. And I think that they win in the hearts and minds of Americans. This is probably the concern that a lot of Republicans had when Obamacare was passed, which is that this is going to become an issue that for generations is defined by the Democratic Party. And I think we're seeing the remnants of that now.
In the wake of this pandemic, there are, of course, as we've reported, millions of Americans who are out of work, trying to figure out how to make ends meet. In Kentucky today, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell spoke about why he thinks there is still no new coronavirus relief bill. Let's listen to some of that.
Really, the difference largely is just how much. The Democratic House of Representatives wants to spend $3.4 trillion. I laid out a bill for $1 trillion, which I thought was more than enough to deal with where we are at this particular juncture, since we're getting some growth out of the economy being opened up again. And we've just simply been unable so far to reach an agreement. I think part of it is because we're a lot closer to the election, and the partisan passions are more on display than they have been, but I haven't given up.
So, Major, at this point, is it likely another relief bill will ever come?
I think it is probably more likely than not, maybe a 60-40 proposition. And technically what the Senate Majority Leader said is true. Those are the parameters, dollar-wise, $3.4 trillion, $1 trillion. But there's one thing he left out. The House passed its bill. The Senate has not passed a bill. The Senate hasn't debated a bill. There is a Republican proposal that can't get through the Senate, in part because it doesn't have the unanimous or even near unanimous support of Senate Republicans. Mitch McConnell's own conference is divided on this question, and the Senate Democrats are united behind, at least in terms of a Senate debate, the $3.4 trillion passed by the House. One other thing that Senate Majority Leader left out. The House passed that $3.4 trillion economic and pandemic intervention bill many weeks ago. The Senate Republicans did nothing, did not propose anything, did not put anything through committee, didn't do anything until almost right before the August recess. And then they stayed around for a few weeks to try to negotiate something. Why that matters is there is no institutional clout from the Senate on this fundamental question. How you obtain institutional clout is you have a bill and then you have a vote. And then once people vote on that bill, either yes or no, you establish what that institution says about that question. The Senate hasn't asked a question, and more important politically, it hasn't answered a question about what the Senate is for. And until that happens, there's one piece of legislation that has institutional heft behind it. You may not like it, but you have to answer it. That's how the legislative process works. And the simple truth is, the White House has been reluctant to fully embrace anything. There's these side negotiations going on, but there isn't a lot of clout either from the White House or Senate Republicans about what they're actually for and what they're actually prepared to horse trade. So there's one piece of legislation that's sort of driving the conversation, the House bill, and Senate Republicans and the White House still have not engaged at a level that is responsive to that institutional clout created by the House. That's one of the reasons you don't have a legislative compromise. But there are plenty of Senate Republicans who are feeling the ongoing burdens of both the health crisis and the underlying economic situation, which, though not a crisis, is not as settled as they would like it to be. They would like to say to their constituents, especially those Republicans seeking re-election, we've done something. I voted for this, and this benefit is now coming because of it. That pressure is building beneath Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. That's why, to use his words, he hasn't given up.
Finally, Joel, before I let you all go, we mentioned this off the top, but there has never been a vice presidential nominee of a major party who has looked like Senator Kamala Harris. How significant is that, especially given the events of 2020?
It's incredibly significant, Elaine, and it's so interesting. I think that the nomination of somebody like Kamala Harris, it really does have this clarifying effect where, I think before the last 2 weeks, people were all over the map about Kamala Harris. Democrats, right, progressives, felt like maybe she wasn't progressive enough, or maybe there wasn't a consistency to her positions. It's amazing how the process of her being named the VP candidate has really changed that because of the historic nature of her candidacy. I think groups who have been historically underrepresented see her as a pioneer, and they see the opportunities that are on the horizon. They also, by the way, it underscores the point that Joe Biden and his campaign have tried to make all the way throughout, that contrast point with President Trump. This is America under Joe Biden. This is the diversity. These are the voices that are going to be in my ear, in my cabinet, influencing my decision making. Kamala Harris representing immigrants, representing women, college-educated women, African Americans. I think there's a powerful simplicity of message of just who she is, her personal story, and I think we're going to see that teased out tonight when she speaks.
All right. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Major Garrett, and Joel Payne, wonderful to see you all. Thank you so much.